Hey guys, this is Caleb. I'm here to teach you guys about photography. So right now I'm going to teach you guys about light. Light is one of the most important things to photography. After all, like how can a camera take a picture without light on the subject, right? And here's a quote I want to read you. It's very slight. Admire it, love it, but above all, know light. Know it for all you are worth, and you will know the key to photography. That was by George Eastman. Eastman was the founder of Kodak, which is obviously one of the greatest film companies of all time. So here's some pictures about light.
Yeah, this photograph is really good for lighting just because we can see the sunset reflecting off the buildings, we can see everything clearly. The sun is obviously illuminating the buildings and not shining behind the buildings, so that we don't see the silhouette and we actually see the details of them. Yeah, the lighting in this photo is okay. It's not super good though, just because we can see that the sun is hitting from the left side of his face. So it's causing shadows on the right side of his face. And yeah, we don't really want this effect. We kind of want to see the face clearly, not too many shadows. And we want to be able to actually have that contrast between the background and the subject as well. Right now, everything is kind of flat, I would say. Everything's kind of exposed or lit the same way.
So right now I'm going to teach you guys about framing. Framing is also one of the most key pillars of photography. After all, if your framing is bad, how are you going to see your subject, or how is the viewer going to know what your subject is? I'll show you some good examples of framing and some bad examples of framing right now.
Yeah, in this photograph, you can see that it's really well framed just because it follows the rule of thirds, and it follows leading lines where we can obviously tell where Bailey is looking, and then we follow his eyes to see downtown in the background. Yeah, at first glance, this picture might seem well framed, but it's really not, because we can obviously tell Bailey's looking at something, but we don't get to see what he's looking at that clearly, because the majority of the picture is taken up by the back of his head. So we would want to move him left a little bit, like in that first picture, and we want to have him look at downtown, and we want to be able to see downtown in the picture as well.
So right now I'm going to teach you guys about ISO, aperture, and shutter speed. And those three settings, they all make up what's called exposure. And what exposure is how light or dark a scene is, based off the settings that you choose. So the first setting that we'll talk about is aperture. You know that really nice effect where your subject's background is really blurred out and you get really nice bokeh? That's aperture actually controls that. So it's interesting because the lower your aperture number, the wider the hole is in your lens, and that lets more light in, and it gives you a better blurred background. So when you turn your aperture number lower, the hole gets wider and that makes more blur. And it also lets in more light, so your picture is going to be brighter. To compensate for that, you can increase your shutter speed. Shutter speed is how fast the mirror and the shutter in front of your sensor goes up and down. So the longer it's open, the more light comes in. But if you have a lower aperture number, you want to make that faster, so less light comes in, so your picture keeps that good exposure. It's not too bright or not too dark. Lastly, we're going to talk about ISO. This one's interesting is because it's how sensitive your sensor is. And what that means is, based off how much light your sensor gets, it can boost itself or lower itself in order to actually make the picture brighter or darker. Problem is with ISO is that the higher you make that number, the more grainy that picture is. And you see that a lot in like lower quality pictures on like Facebook, or like when you take a photo with your phone when it's really dark, you see that grain in your photos. And that's because it's caused by really high ISO. So generally, the rule is you want to keep your ISO down, if possible. In a lot of circumstances, it's not possible. Like, let's say I'm shooting at winter retreat, or let's say I'm shooting in a low light retreat situation, or a low light bro situation, or anything like that. I'll need to boost my ISO just because there's not a lot of light available. And that's actually called the exposure triangle, where one setting affects the other ones. Like let's say I lower my aperture number, That means I'm letting in more light, so I need to either lower my ISO or increase my shutter speed in order to make sure that that picture is still well exposed. And I know this is a lot for you guys to just understand by speaking, so I'll show you some examples.
The first picture I'm showing you guys is actually well exposed. The shutter speed is not too slow or too fast. The ISO is decent, not too high, not too low for this lighting circumstance. And yeah, I set the aperture to the lowest number that it would go so that we get the most amount of light and the most amount of bokeh. Yeah, so this picture that I'm showing you guys is pretty obviously wrong. The shutter speed is way too slow and is similar to a picture that you would get when you're using your phone at really late at night or when it's really dark. Although the picture is exposed properly, as in there's a right amount of light for everything, we couldn't actually get the shutter speed fast enough to make sure the camera isn't shaky when we're taking the picture. Yeah, so that's just some of the basics of photography. Thank you guys for watching. Hope you guys liked the video.